Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Service Level Agreements in ServiceNow. My name is Amanda Greiner, Marketing Coordinator with GSI, and I'm also very pleased to welcome our main presenter, Joe Nicolosi, Senior ITSM Consultant. Now before we get started, I wanted to give you a chance to review our Safe Harbor Statement. And now for a quick overview of today's meeting, which will last about 60 minutes. First, we would like to take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items as well as provide a brief company overview. Then I'll turn it over to Joe to get into our main presentation, which will last about 40 minutes. Next, I'll take a minute to go over some upcoming educational events, and then we will wrap up with a 10-minute Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the questions panel at the bottom of the GoToWebinar console window located on the right side of your screen. Please note that questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, so if you would like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation, just click the right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. Clicking the left arrow key will return the console so that you can input your questions. And now I'd like to give you a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a full-service ServiceNow consulting organization. We're an Oracle Platinum partner that was founded in 2004 and now has over 100 employees. We have offices nationwide and are recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest-growing companies in the U.S. GSI specializes in project consulting, managed services, and cloud and hosting services, with all of our services backed with a 100% guarantee. GSI also provides a broad spectrum of business, functional, and technical consulting services for Oracle JD Edwards, Oracle NetSuite, Oracle Cloud, Salesforce, and other enterprise applications. And now I'd like to turn things over to Joe to get into our main presentation and demo.
All right, thank you, Amanda.
No problem.
Let me go ahead and all right, we got that going. Okay. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about service level agreements in ServiceNow. Really the first part of this is going to be kind of product agnostic, because it's going to be regarding how to start gathering what you need to make them, and that really applies to any product that does SLAs. So we're going to talk about basic SLAs, how to gather requirements, how to figure out what the workflow is going to be, and then demo how to do all of that in ServiceNow. All right. So when you're gathering requirements for an SLA, when you're sitting down with stakeholders, you want to first, define, are we talking about a response or a resolution SLA? There are also availability SLAs that you can create that look for availability of like, let's say, servers or something like that. So I don't want to exclude those, but we're just going to be talking about response and resolution, which are 90% of the SLAs out there, really. It's how long, after I submit a ticket, am I going to get a call back? What constitutes response, and how long until it's resolved? Right? And you want to ask, are we talking about a response or a resolution SLA? So the next one are, what are the milestones in between? So if we're going to say that we're going to have a resolution SLA for priority 1 of 1 hour, well, what happens at 15 minutes? Anything? Are we going to do it at 15 minutes, or are we only going to have something that happens at 30 minutes? So what are the milestones within that hour that we want to have? Right. Then what actions need to be taken at each milestone? Now, ServiceNow is very powerful, and you can do a lot of stuff with it as far as what would happen at the milestone. Traditionally, you've got, let's say it's a 2-hour SLA on resolve SLA on a priority too, right? You want to say, all right, well, at 25% of the time used up, we're going to send a notification to the assignee that says, hey, your SLA is at 25%. So you've got your first milestone at 25%. Your first action is simply a notification. Then at 50%, maybe you send a notification to the assignee and the assignee's manager, right? Or maybe you set a field on the incident, something like escalated yes, or maybe even reassign it to a target team. It's really, like I said, it's really open to you what you want each action to happen at each milestone. The milestones are very important, mainly because you don't want to have an SLA out there that you're just sending notifications when they breach. You need to be able to tell your the assignee, hey, you're running out of time on this, and that will get them to go ahead and either get to work on it or figure out some way to meet the SLA. So what actions are going to happen at which milestone during those SLAs? And then you need to decide how performance is going to be reviewed. Are we going to submit a weekly SLA report that's going to get emailed out to everybody? What sort of agreement needs to be made for that? Whoa, my slideshow was awfully short because I forgot to unhide these slides. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. All right. So basic SLAs, you've got response and resolution. That's pretty standard across the industry, right? So the response SLA, this seems like an easy definition, but it's the time from the incident is open to first acknowledgement. Now, out of the box and pretty much around with ServiceNow and other products, an SLA, a response SLA, is met when an individual is assigned to the incident. So when you're talking to, make sure that everybody understands that's what constitutes acknowledgement, right? That's what meets the response SLA when we actually assign it to an individual. So the clock is still ticking on response SLAs while it's sitting in the group queue, right? And then once you assign it, now that doesn't necessarily mean once the person who's assigned that incident actually calls the customer back, that's going to be up to you to how you want to define it. Certainly ServiceNow can support that, but generally it's considered when an individual is assigned to the incident or task or change or whatever it is you're running the SLA on. We're just going to use incident today. All right, so generally they're based on priority. Now, if you're familiar with ServiceNow, you've got impact and urgency that calculate up to priority. I've had some customers who run SLAs based on a matrix of priority, impact, urgency, and other fields. You certainly have the ability to do that, but I recommend keeping it simple and just having priority drive it. So these are just some examples. You've got critical, 15 minutes, high, 1 hour, moderate, 1 day, and low, 2 days. And that's for assigning an individual, right? Resolution SLAs, much more straightforward. When that incident is placed into the resolve status, that constitute meeting the resolution SLA, and then you've got priority and times as well. Those are pretty basic, and this is varying on the times. This is what most customers will go with. All right, I really messed up this slide deck. Sorry, guys. I want to get to this. All right. So you want to define milestones and actions. So this is, in ServiceNow, it becomes a workflow, just like all of your other catalog item workflows and that sort of thing. You have a workflow that drives you through the process between when the SLA begins and when it ends. In this one, we're waiting for half of the duration of the SLA, and we're sending a notification to the assignee, and then we're waiting up to 75%. We're notifying the assignee again, and then at full breach, we're notifying the manager. Really, the sky's the limit here because this workflow engine is pretty powerful, and you can do all sorts of things. I mean, you could even make, if you had the right software entitlements, you could make REST calls to other systems and automate things. There's a lot of power here, but you need to make a decision of what it is you want that workflow to be. Right. And that really is all my slides. I didn't have a lot, so good. One other thing I wanted to mention is when you're maybe before you start gathering requirements, it's not a bad idea before you start implementing SLAs to go ahead and pick out of air, make an educated guess of what you think you can do, what you think your organization can handle as far as SLAs, and configure those in ServiceNow and turn them on without telling anybody. Right? That way you can start to get some metrics to get an idea of reasonable time frames for these that you and your organization can meet before you go to the customer and say, okay, well, here's our SLA schedule, right? Here's what we feel comfortable that we can meet, and then goes into a negotiation with the customer at that point. And yeah, you just want to have those conversations, and before you have those conversations, you want to have data that's going to back up what you think you're able to, because just saying we're going to respond to a priority 2 within 1 hour seems reasonable, but if you're really understaffed, maybe it's not that reasonable. All right, enough of that. All right, so when you go to ServiceNow, you've got service level management, right? Now out of the box, they're going to give you a bunch of these already set up. All right, I'm going to look at response first. Right, and they kind of have the same sort of setup, and you can use these as a starting place. I don't mind them, but if you look here on the top of the SLA, you've got a name, it's type SLA, you've got OLAs and then underpinning contracts. So if you really wanted to get down to the nitty gritty, you could define not only SLAs but OLAs. You get kind of into sort of a maintenance headache there. And one thing you do want to avoid, mind you, is the situation where you've got different SLAs for different support groups. The network team having their own set of SLAs versus the desktop team starts to get really complicated when you're starting to look at reports and make measurements across the IT organization. So you really, really don't want to, you want to try to avoid doing that because things just start getting out of hand at that point. But one thing that you can do is implement OLAs within your SLAs. Now OLAs are operational level agreements. So imagine a situation where an incident comes into my service desk and my service desk has a 3-hour resolution SLA on that. Well, the service desk can't fix it. It's some sort of networking problem, right? So they need to go and have the network team take a look at it. right? So they assign it over to the network team. Well, the network team has an operational level agreement with the service desk to respond in a certain frame of time and to resolve within a certain frame of time so that the service desk can make their SLA, right? So within an SLAs are agreements you have with customers, where OLAs are agreements that you have with each other within the IT organization. Only really, really mature companies that I've run into actually have OLAs configured and working that way, but certainly ServiceNow has the power to do that. Then underpinning contracts are the same sort of thing that you have with vendors. But most people just run SLAs and they have very basic setups, so we'll do that. So you choose the table. This one's for incident. You might have a custom application, or you might do this on catalog tasks. Although the catalog has its own delivery schedules and stuff like that that you can implement that might be better suited to that. SLAs are very well suited to incident. All right, it has a workflow. This particular, I liked this workflow that came with my dev instance, right? It's waiting 50% of the SLA duration, right? It's going to notify the assignee, right? This one's cool. It's going to even notify the supported by of the affected CI for the incident. I like that, right? And then, at 75%, don't get confused here when it says wait 50%. This should say wait an additional 25%, and then notify the assignee and the manager, and then wait for it to breach, and once it breaches, notify the assignee and the manager again. You could set a field on the form like escalated yes, assign it to a new team. There's all sorts. You've got full access to all of the workflow components of ServiceNow to implement in here. So, keep it simple, but know that you can go crazy if you wanted to. All right. So of course it's got an active flag, whether or not you want to log it. Then the duration type, right? And the duration. So this one's 15 minutes. And then it has a schedule, right? So if you don't have a schedule selected, it's running 24/7. Most customers that I've dealt with have their priority 1 critical SLAs running 24/7. They even have their priority 2s running 24/7. Priority 3s and 4s maybe run on business hours, right? So they're only ticking away from 8 to 5, or however long their support organization is open for. But that's where you specify the schedule for that. It's just a simple scheduling part of ServiceNow, nothing crazy there. And then you've got the start condition, right? So if you're familiar at all with ServiceNow, this is your standard condition builder, right? So this is a response SLA, right? So active is true, priority is critical, and assignment group, that's wrong. It's a response SLA. An assignment group is empty, right? Set start date on created. You get a choice. You can start it on actual start, actual end for change management. But most people go off the create date. Retroactive start is a good little checkbox. So what this means is, let's say this got assigned around, and maybe it's an SLA for a particular OLA or something like that, and you're saying, okay, we'll start from all the way from the beginning, or if the assignment group got, oh, sorry, this was right. I thought it said assignee. That's right. All right. Assignment group is not empty. So retroactive start just means start back from created, right? when you restart it. Without it, you're restarting the SLA at the time that it was reassigned. And same thing with retroactive pause with the pause condition. This one's set to cancel when start conditions are no longer met, like when it's no longer critical, right? Then you've got the pause condition, and this is the real power, as far as I'm concerned, and what most people love about SLAs, not just in ServiceNow, but other products, is the ability to pause. It used to be a lot of folks were measuring their service desk based on MTTR, or mean time to resolve, right? Which was a simple, basic measure of the time it was created to the time it was resolved, right? But there's so many things that can go on during that time that are not the responsibility of your service desk, and that number is not really all that consistent, or I think even a good measure. So pause conditions pause the SLA. So this one doesn't have one, but we can set one up for something like pause when the state is on hold and when the on hold reason is a waiting caller. So this is a pretty standard pause condition right here of when I place it on hold, a waiting caller, I've sent an email to the customer, or I've talked to them on the phone and I'm waiting for them to send me something. So while you're waiting on the customer to get back with you, that shouldn't really be charged against the service desk. So here's where you set that up so that you can have a condition where, you know, you're not being counted against while the customer's taking their sweet old time. Then you've got the stop condition. So whenever this one is really weird, but the important thing here is this is state is not new and assigned to is not empty. So stop this clock when assigned to is not empty. So I said that's pretty much the standard across the industry as far as what constitutes a response to an incident is assigning it to an individual. You may come up with your own version of this. It may be a call to the customer that you then have the technician set a field that says called, yes, initial call made, yes, no, whatever it is. However you decide to do it, know that you've got tons of flexibility there, but most people just assume it's when we assign an individual. And that's basically what this says. All right, and then you've got the reset, and that's the condition under which the running SLA will be canceled, completed, and a new SLA attached. So it could be that if you go from resolved back to new, so let's say the customer doesn't accept the resolution, and you go back to assigned again and to assign it to a new individual, you may reset the SLA at that point, and you get a brand new set of, you know, minutes or hours or however long you need. I haven't had a lot of customers use this because most people think, well, no, if it's not resolved, it's not resolved. The same SLA should be applying. But if you've already stopped the SLA on resolve, well, now you're no longer on SLA for this, hey, it's not resolved time. So something you might want to think about. All right, that's the basic SLA form. But I want to show you a few other things. Here, when we look at incident, make sure to choose one that's got one ticket on it. We are in new. I'm just going to create one. Okay. Assign this over to someone in the network team. All right, and I got my impact and my urgency. And down here you can see in this task SLAs table, the SLAs that are currently active for this particular incident. All right. Here we've assigned it to network, priority high, right? And we have a resolution time, right? When it started, how much time you've got left, how much time has elapsed. These are going to be nice and colored, right? You'll notice my priority to response is on there. This is an OLA for the network group. Priority to response and priority to resolution. Ticking away, giving me business time left. Now those are going to be working through their workflows. You can click on Show SLA Timeline, which is going to be a nice white screen as it loads. I don't use this interface much, but it does give you a nice little elapsed time look at the SLA. Probably looks a little bit better when you've got a completed SLA. But here you can view the conditions for the SLA and where you are at in that SLA process. If we go back, there's some repair SLAs. So I've used this rarely, but it can come into handy, especially if you do background updates that break some of these, or you've got SLAs that look really crazy. Repairing the SLAs will basically recalculate everything on them. All right, so you've got your SLAs, you've got your actions, things are happening. We're going to assign this to somebody. All right, assign this to David. Mark it in progress. Save it. All right. So now we see that our response SLA is completed. We still have our network group OLA running, and our priority to resolution SLA is running. And if we look at the SLA timeline, we can see that noted here. Which is nice. All right, so David Liu here works it, he resolves it. Of course, I have to fill in resolution information. And there you go. I see it pauses it. Then we're closed. Goes ahead and completes it. Yeah, so this one worked out a pause during resolved state. That's not a bad idea. So that it just restarts if you come out of resolved in that case where the resolution isn't accepted by the customer. Now I've had, a a lot of times I've had customers where, let me open up one of these. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Where we set up the pause condition for on hold awaiting caller. So I place it on hold awaiting caller, and I send an email to the customer that says, ask them to restart, because that's the first thing you do. All right, that email gets sent out, and the customer looks at that email and says, okay, I'll restart, and sends back a reply that says, okay, I restarted it, that didn't fix the problem. All right. You can configure your inbound actions to automatically take this off. And I've done that for a few customers where as soon as that reply comes in, we're automatically changing that state, either back to in progress or new, or however you might have your state diagram worked out. But that's not a bad idea either, especially if you also include in there a notification that well, there already is a notification that goes back to the assignee or the assignment group. That's already out of the box when that happens, and they get a note that says, hey, so-and-so has responded. Boom. Now the clock's ticking again. Oh, this one breached by a lot. That's the value of demo data right there. Okay, so what sort of, how are we going to report on some of these, and what are some of the reports that are available? So in service level agreements, you've got an overview. ServiceNow's putting in these overview dashboards for just about all of their modules nowadays. And they're, out of the box, they're pretty helpful. And you, of course, have the power to change this around and change these different modules within here. Right? Actually, impersonate somebody who might actually have some data in there. You'll notice ITIL users obviously don't have access to much, but they do have access to the overview, which is nice. All right. Got some paused, we've got some in progress, and we can view them here. And we're a terrible service desk because we're at 7,000% of our priority 2 resolution on that ticket. But you get the idea, right? You've got the overview, which is, I like. But that's not the only. Here. Typing in service into the ServiceNow Navigator doesn't get you very far. It's filtered. Lots of things called service. All right. So here you can set up some condition rules. You have the workflow editor, of course, because SLAs run workflows just like catalog items do. You've got properties that you can set. I don't think I have time to go through all of these, but ServiceNow is doing a good job of setting up their properties now with good explanations for what they all do. Right. You have logging, you have ways to repair broken SLAs, orphaned and redoing or getting rid of orphans and that sort of stuff. Right. That's pretty much it. This is pretty full featured as far as an SLA module is concerned. There's also plenty of out-of-the-box reports that come with ServiceNow around SLAs. All right, SLA duration by assigned user. This will probably be one that determines somebody's bonuses. But there's plenty of reports that you can make copies of and start doing your own reports. So I don't want to get too much into reporting here. The main point, though, that I really want you guys to take away is not really the implementation part, which in ServiceNow is really easy. They give you a start, so there's not much doing with it. The important thing here is the upfront work before you actually go into ServiceNow. It's the herding of the cats, right? You've got to build consensus among your IT organization as to what these should be, right? And then you've got to make that negotiation back to the business to say, okay, here are our SLAs. And it's always good to go into that negotiation knowing a little bit of information ahead of time as to what your teams are capable of. So it's not a bad idea at all to go ahead and implement these, taking a swag at what the duration should be. And maybe for the first month you're gonna measure your team on these and see how well you do. Maybe your swags were way too much time, and you can narrow those down and then be all that more impressive when you go to the customer and you say, well, what would you like for resolution time? We feel we can make 30 minutes. And they're, oh wow, all I really wanted was an hour, but yeah, we'll take 30 minutes, and that you can do it in 15. But yeah, things to avoid, don't come in here and having different SLAs based on categories, right? Oh, well, if it's a category of hardware, then our response SLA should be this. I know it's tempting to do that because you may, I want to be able to measure these guys on the different types of tickets that they're getting. You can do that in reporting later, but avoid building out SLAs for different categories or different groups. That's my recommendation anyway. All right, I think that's it for the demo. Amanda, we want to go to questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Here, I'll take it back over. Okay. So I just wanted to cover a few follow-up items and then move into the question and answer section of our webcast. So GSI provides free educational resources for the ServiceNow community, including our educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, and our online resource center where you can access hundreds of recorded on-demand webcasts, white papers, etc. And if you would like to sign up for our email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or to create an account to access our resource center, you can go to getgsi.com, go to Resources and Events on the main menu, select ServiceNow, and then select the appropriate link on the right. Okay, so I see we've already had several questions submitted online, and I would like to remind everyone that if you would still like to submit a question, you can do so using the questions panel in the GoToWebinar console window on the right of your screen. If you minimized your console earlier, please click the left arrow to redisplay the questions panel. Okay. Pull up the questions here. Okay, our first question is, what is the difference between OLA and SLA in ServiceNow, and when would you use each one?
Yeah, so service level agreement is the agreement that you have with the customer. So the overarching, okay, a priority one is going to be resolved within an hour. An OLA, or operational level agreement, is an agreement that you have between support teams. So the service desk has a SLA with the customer of 2 hours, let's say, and then they have an operational level agreement with the network team that any tickets that I said the bad word, any incidents that the service desk assigns to the network team has a certain response SLA to them, or OLA, sorry, and a resolution OLA to the service desk so that the service desk can maintain their SLA with the customer. So SLAs with customers, OLAs with your internal folks.
Okay, great. Next one is there a concept of subsequent response times?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but it does, you have a way of either resetting the SLA, which wouldn't be a subsequent time, or having the SLA pause on resolve like it does in the demo, like it did in the demo. And then in a response SLA, as soon as that's met, maybe you restart that response when it gets assigned to a different team. It depends on how you want to handle it between SLAs and OLAs. But yes, I would think so.
Okay. Is there a countdown timer on each incident/problem that can be viewed?
It's not really a countdown timer, but if you look in the task SLAs table, you get a big bar that's got a green, and then it turns to yellow, and then it turns to red as it fills up. And you can always see the time remaining. But it's all in that table in task SLAs. So simply because you don't want to just have one field for it on the form, because you could have 5 or 6 SLAs applying to a particular, and OLAs all applying to one particular incident.
Okay. Is there a concept of initial or subsequent response violation, checkbox, or indication on the incident problem in which to report?
So there's a whole separate join table that you would report on called task SLA or incident SLA. And it's a join between the SLA and the incident or whatever task table you have the SLA running on. Most obviously, we'll just talk about incident. So there's a separate join view that kind of is treated just like a table, and you can start reporting on that and getting, you will get responses just like you have that task SLA table at the bottom of incident that shows you, all the SLAs that were ever active, what their completed time, whether or not they were paused or canceled or anything like that. All of that's available for reports, and as a matter of fact, most of the reports that report on SLAs report on that table. So yes, but it's not really a checkbox or one field that you would put on the incident or problem, again, because you've got a situation where you could have multiple service level agreements that apply to any one incident.
Okay. Do you find many people using resolved as a pause condition and active equals false as the stop condition?
Yeah, although most people just use the on hold pause conditional. Most companies, organizations that I've worked with, want that SLA stopped on resolved. I like it as a pause condition because if the customer comes back and says no, you've got the original, but you might choose that as a reset judgment call. But believe it or not, most of my customers who implement this, I don't like necessarily using the active flag, but they do use the pause condition because resolved is still an active state in incident. So you have kind of a weird system there. You would at least, if you wanted to use active equals false as the stop condition and resolved as a pause condition. That's certainly a fine way to do it, but really most people are just like, no, when it hits resolved, that's when we meet the resolved SLA.
Okay, great. Next one is, can you pause all clocks based on business hours and holidays?
Absolutely. That's that schedule feature. You can attach a schedule to an SLA. So like I said, a lot of customers are running 24/7 when it comes to priority 1, or maybe even 24/7 when it comes to priority 2, but all the rest of them, they run on business hours. So if a incident comes in with a 3-hour SLA on it, and it comes in at 4:55, you're not gonna, it's gonna run the clock for 5 minutes and then start it back up again at 8 in the morning.
Okay, our next one is service level management uses IT service management license, correct? We don't need an additional module activated.
That's correct.
Okay. Next one, which differences can you point out for SLAs for incident versus SLAs versus request?
So the thing about requests are generally if you've put it out on your service catalog, you already have a good idea of the process and how long it takes. And a lot of times your catalog item will actually say, okay, we're gonna, to fulfill this request, it takes 3 days, right? At that point, SLAs are maybe not as important, certainly not a response SLA, unless if you had something like a generic request catalog item that just said, make a request, and then the service desk has to decide what it is. Yeah, you may want to put an SLA on that. But if you had a service request that is something like set up this user in AD, right, and you've already got an agreement set up, and maybe that catalog item says this takes 24 hours, right? Well, that's your SLA, is that 24 hours delivery time. So I only see SLAs implemented on in the service catalog module when you've got a situation where you've got a generic sort of request that people are going to submit to the service desk, and it's just another path that is an incident.
Okay, great. Next question. And when you set up request SLAs, do you base them on REQ or RITM or SCTASK?
I wouldn't put it on the REQ, certainly not. The REQ is just a shopping cart, doesn't get assigned to anyone, so it's difficult to set up an SLA on that. The RITM is the same situation. The RITM doesn't get assigned to anyone, it's just an item within the cart. But that said, it's not about, if you're going to do that SLA on the requested item, you could do a completed SLA on requested items where you think, okay, well, this particular item, this add user to AD, should only take 24 hours, so we're going to put a 24-hour complete SLA on this. And then you can measure that and run reports and that sort of stuff using SLAs. But I would either put it on the RITM or the SC task. The SC task makes the most sense because it actually has an assignment group and an assignee, whereas REC or RITM don't.
Okay, our next question. It was said not to build SLA of off categories. What is the best way to start?
Yeah, so your categorization scheme, your categories and subcategories are things that are going to change a lot. So you introduce a lot of complexity into your model there when you say, all right, I'm going to have an SLA of 1 hour for network issues and 2 hours for hardware issues, and then you go back and you change network to, well, I want to expand network out to different things, and then you have to go back and update your SLAs. So there's a lot of problems there, and it gets a lot of complicated. Your service level agreements, at least for incidents, should be kind of across the board and not really dependent on category or assignment group. And you definitely don't want to have assignment groups picking their own SLAs. Assignment groups can definitely pick their OLAs, and they can definitely, you can have a big long meeting where people argue and they try to decide what their OLAs are going to be. But for your agreements back with the customer that says, you submit an incident to us, we're going to respond in this amount of time, right? Doesn't matter what it's for, this is our response. Based on purely on priority. It's just keeping it simple. You'll get this, start out simple, and then you can maybe add some complexities in there if need be or if demanded by the business. But if you want to get, the best way to start is to keep things simple, run it by priority, take some good swags at it first, get some data to back you up, and then decide what your real SLAs are going to be that you publish back to the customer.
Okay, great. Our last question is, can an SLA be paused when the task is in a pending state and then pick up where it left off rather than restarting when the state is moved out of pending to a state other than resolved?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what the pause condition does. You set up the pause condition to say pause on pending, and then as soon as it's not pending, it's not paused anymore, and it's picked up where it left off.
Okay, great. That appears to be the end of the questions today, so thank you, Joe, for all those answers. And as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit. You'll be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. After today's webcast, we will do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card. Anyone who attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact either Joe or myself, and we will get back to you. Our contact information is on the screen. Thanks for attending our presentation, and we hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.